The alarm was still set to Sunday hours when the ship shuddered. Morning light had just begun to wash the port of Miami's cruise berths. The SS Norway sat alongside, lines taut, gangways down, the night shift handing off today. Down on a service deck aft, crewmen in blue coveralls pushed linen carts toward the lifts and joked about shore leave. The air carried a clean, hot metal smell from the engine spaces. At 6:37 a.m., a flash of white rolled through the corridor like a door opening to a hotter world. The floor pitched. A sound like tearing sheet steel filled the space, and then it was all noise and heat and running feet. In the engine room below, a high-pressure steam line ruptured near one of the aging boilers. The blast tore insulation and plating, sheared pipe supports, and hurled scalding vapor through every opening. Gauges jumped, then died. Lights flickered. The first men to it were hit before they could see what hit them. Those above felt the ship sag as the shock wave ran through the hull and up the ladders. A steward halfway down a companionway saw a white cloud climb the shaft and retreated so fast he dropped his mop. On the main deck, a few early passengers, bags at their feet, looked up from the terminal windows and asked what that bang had been. Someone told them not to worry, just a generator. The Norway was no ordinary liner. Launched in 1960 as the SS France, she had been built around steam, giant boilers feeding turbines that pushed her across oceans. After her 1980s conversion for Caribbean work, she still depended on the same basic heart: high temperature, high pressure steam. The ship was elegant on top: pool decks, show lounges, the long blue sweep of a classic hull. But under it lay systems as old as their design drawings, kept alive by parts, skill, and habit. On most days, that was romance. On a May morning in 2003, it was risk made real. Security paged Alpha Team to engine room. The chief engineer pressed the crash bar on the control room door and felt the heat through the skin on his wrist. The first firefighting squad at the hatch recoiled. The stream from their hose flashed to vapor before it touched anything. A second team came in low with breathing gear and heat suits, trying to find the isolation valves by memory because they could not see the panel. Bridge watches threw the breakers on non-essential loads. Tugs on the berth lines saw crew run to the stern and began spraying cooling water over the hull. Miami-Dade Fire Rescue arrived minutes later with airport crash trucks and a mass casualty bus. Paramedics staged on the pier as crew carried the injured up from the steel ladders, men with burns on faces and hands, shirts cut away with trauma shears, hair curled tight by heat. The first names called were all crew. The blast had hit the people who kept the ship moving, not the guests who filled the brochures. Sirens layered over ship horns. At the terminal gate, a port worker stopped a family and said they would have to wait. No one could tell them why. Inside the vessel, engineers worked the steam plant like a battlefield. They closed the main stop valves, bled off heat, and fought flare-ups from blowing insulation. The alarm panel filled with red. The aft service decks fogged with vapor that made radios crackle and die. In the hospital, the doctor wrote morphine doses in a ledger for the record, then stopped writing and just treated, counting breaths and timing drips by the wall clock. The list of names grew. 8 crewmen would not live to see noon. By midday, the company issued the first statement. An accident in the engine spaces. Limited damage. No danger to the public. The words were technically true to someone standing on the pier, not to the men who had stood under ruptured pipe. News helicopters hovered and shot through haze that still vented from the afterdeck. Reporters went live from the bridge next door and said boiler explosion, because that was the phrase people knew. Engineers flinched at the term. What failed was a main steam line, not the pressure vessel itself. To the victims, the difference did not matter. Investigators from the Coast Guard and the National Transportation Safety Board began work by evening. They followed the scorch marks to the point of failure, measured wall thickness where the pipe had torn back, and cut samples for a lab. Maintenance logs were copied. Inspection records were boxed. The line that failed had served since the ship's earliest years. Erosion and corrosion thinned it from the inside, where scale and wet steam work slowly and invisibly. Ultrasonic surveys, if done, had not flagged the exact spot. Everyone knew the plant was old. Few could say precisely which inch of steel would give first. Crew interviews unfolded in the kind of English that ships use, a blend of maritime terms and the accents of the Philippines, the Balkans, the Caribbean. A wiper described a hiss that sounded wrong, and then a sound like a hammer on a drum before the light went white. A junior engineer talked about chasing leaks with paste and clamps because scheduled overhauls had slipped while the ship kept sailing. A fitter said, "You learn to listen with your fingertips on the casing." The Coast Guard team wrote it all down and kept their faces still. Passengers trickled away that afternoon, refunds processed, luggage rolled to taxis. The gangways pulled back, leaving a cordon of police tape and the smell of wet metal. At a nearby hotel, officers delivered the list of dead to a man from the consulate. Most were Filipinos, boilermakers, oilers, motormen, men whose remittances held up houses half a world away. Company representatives promised flights, compensation, and condolences. In the hospital waiting rooms, shipmates from the same village took turns at payphones. Privately, lawyers gathered. The ship had suffered a fatal engineering failure in port under U.S. jurisdiction. Plaintiffs' firms reached out to families before the shock wore off. Norwegian Cruise Line statements stayed clipped. Everything would be handled with respect. Investigations were ongoing. Behind the words, the business decision started to coalesce. The Norway was already a special case, costly to crew, costly to fuel, costly to comply with tightening regulations. The blast tipped that math. NCL canceled her next sailings and laid her up. There was talk of repairs in Europe. There was talk of retirement. The technical picture hardened over the summer. Inspectors traced the rupture to thinning in a section of main steam piping. The thickness at the failure measured below allowable minimum. Heat, flow, and aging had made the steel weak. With full line pressure, it tore. The report did not read like scandal. It read like the story of a system pushed past the point where good luck and good hands could cover for the calendar. But the human facts kept their own count. 8 dead, more injured, and a ship that would never sail under her own power again. Legal claims followed, then settlements, sealed in the way corporate settlements often are. Some families spoke about checks that came with limits on what else could be said. Former crew talked about being advised not to discuss the accident publicly. The company avoided admitting fault in general terms, while the technical record pointed to a failure of inspection and renewal. In the cruise brochures, the Norway vanished quietly. In maritime circles, she became a word carried with a shrug, the grand liner that ended not at sea, but at a berth, felled by a pipe. In 2004, a tug took her out of Miami. The skyline slid past her lifeboat davits. She crossed the Atlantic in tow to a European yard, then onward to Malaysia for layup. The paint chalked, the windows filmed with salt. Finally, she went to India under a new name and beached at Alang, where men with torches cut her into weight and invoice. Environmental groups fought the move over asbestos and residual oils. Courts delayed, then relented. Photographs from the breaking yard show the famous bow opened like a jaw, decks stacked like a cross-section, the steam drums enormous, even in ruin. Back in Miami, the pier where she lay that morning hosts other ships, taller and broader, their hotel superstructures dwarfing the old blue hull in memory. If you stand on the terminal roof at dawn, the harbor looks clean as a photograph. You would not know that a line of pipe once turned violent there, or that a doctor counted breaths against heat in a room with fogged goggles. or that a security guard held a family at a glass door because the right words did not yet exist. The official reports teach clear lessons in inspection intervals, wall thickness calculations, and replacement priorities for high-pressure systems. On paper, they are tidy. For the people who worked that plant, the lessons are personal and blunt. Old steel fails, a missed reading matters, a shortcut becomes a story someone else has to tell. Ships age invisibly below the carpet and stage lights. The Norway's ending made that truth public. The crew who died that morning left photographs in wallets and laundry pockets, later mailed home with effects sorted into labeled bags. Their names move past quickly in most accounts. On board, the places they worked, the catwalk by the drum, the ladder to the condenser flat, kept the marks of a day that ended wrong. The company moved on, the industry moved on, the port moved on. The families did what families do when the work that feeds them also takes them. They remembered, and they keep remembering. Thank you for listening to the Sunken Ledger. Subscribe for more true stories from the depths.